It's trade season in the NBA, trade season. And if you know anything about Locked On Grizzlies, you know that we are all about some trades. Now, will they actually happen? Do the Grizzlies even need to make a trade? How realistic are these targets? What kind of names are we talking about? Is Kevin Durant coming to Memphis? Probably not. What about OG Anunoby? Maybe. Perhaps it's a name you haven't even thought of yet. And by the way, the Memphis Grizzlies are still, even after a 5-game losing streak, the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. Is a trade even needed? We talk about that on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies, a proud member of the Locked On podcast family. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Rate, review, subscribe at all of those different avenues. We're also on YouTube, like, comment, all those fun things. It is much appreciated as you make Locked On Grizzlies a part of your Memphis Grizzlies NBA content experience. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. I am joined by the wonderful, the tremendous, the talented, the very dapperly looking Damichael Cole of the Memphis Commercial Appeal. Covers the Grizzlies like nobody else can for that publication. Does a tremendous job. And a couple of off days for Damichael after a long road trip. Not to say that you just don't work at all, because I know you're writing and you're talking to players. I'm sure they'll practice if they haven't already done so. That's probably coming up on today on Tuesday. So you're doing stuff, but it must just be nice to be back in your own bed, man.
So nice to be back in my own bed. You know, when I first got back, Joe, I sat back in my bed for a second. I just looked up at the ceiling, and I had one of those moments where I just looked up and I just, took a deep sigh of relief, just relaxed, and I turned the TV on, and it's been a while since I could just hit the Netflix button and just, cross my legs up a little bit and just sit back, but I enjoyed it.
It's fun, right? It's a fun part of your job, but there's no place like home, like Dorothy once said to that random dog Toto. There's no place like home. So now that I've dated myself with a Wizard of Oz reference, let's dive into what everybody wants to talk about this time of year: trades. It's an off day for the Grizzlies. We don't have really any games to talk about. I don't know if you heard the episode yesterday, Damichael, but I covered the Reddit post thing pretty extensively.
Yeah.
I yelled a lot, and I apologize to you, I think, as part of my rant, and you weren't even on the show yesterday. So, I go black sometimes when I rant. So anybody that watched yesterday's show, I appreciate it. You got a kick out of it.
I think they like it, Joe. I think they like when you bring that side out of you from time to time.
I think I even dropped I did a mic drop about being a paid hobbyist about the Memphis Grizzlies. I was pretty proud of myself for that last line. I'm not going to lie. But anyway, yesterday's in the past. We're in the moment here, and we can talk about trades on this off day for the Grizzlies. And before we get into names that we both kind of like, right? Bigger stars, smaller role player types that could potentially be fits for the Grizzlies. I think that we don't have to agree, of course. You and I agree pretty often, but, spice of life is a little bit of disagreement. So I'm curious, Damichael, what you think about whether or not this team even needs a trade, because as we sit here, they remain the number 2 seed in the Western Conference by a pretty sizable margin. The rest of the West is pretty jumbled, from the 3 seed to the play-in. I think there's 3 games of separation. Memphis is separated by 3 games from that nonsense. So the Grizzlies are closer to the 1 seed than they are the 3. Are they in a place where they even need a trade in your mind, or do you think that continued focus on internal development, Danny Green, who I know we'll talk more about tomorrow on that episode as he makes his debut for the Grizzlies on Wednesday night against Portland, obviously lots of different moving pieces and parts. Do you think this Grizzlies team needs to make a trade to cement their contender status, or do you think they're already there?
Yeah. As you know, I like to do, Joe, before I answer my question, I always like to, preface it with a certain amount of things before I actually get to the point.
That's true. Background info.
Yeah. You got to. And in this case, I want to say no team's perfect. In theory, every team could possibly use a trade to strengthen whatever possible weakness.
Even the team that's closest to perfect in the NBA this season, the Boston Celtics, has pretty noticeable weaknesses at times.
Exactly. Even the 2017 Golden State Warriors, people were talking about them adding big men, to complement that, fearsome 4 or handsome 5, whatever you want to call it. But anyways, with all that being said, the Grizzlies have things that they can improve at, of course. We've talked extensively about them here on Locked On Grizzlies. Free throw shooting, 3-point defense on the road, 3-point percentage, period. Half-court offense. We've talked extensively about all these things. But, Joe, I don't think they have to make a trade. I am of the thought the Grizzlies are the number 2 seed for a reason. And let's break it down like this. I talk about the starting lineup. I'm not going to do the whole thing where I talk about all the guys being the best at something. If you've been listening to Locked On Grizzlies, you've heard me talk about it. Basically, the thing about the Grizzlies starting 5, when everyone's healthy, they have great players at something in each way. And we've seen them need all of those guys at certain times. They needed Ja Morant in a lot of fourth quarters. You need Desmond Bane to help out, the shooting. You need Dillon Brooks when the opponent has a red hot shooter. You need Jaren Jackson Jr. to protect the paint, and you need Steven Adams when nobody can't make a shot. So with all that being said, all these guys kind of factor into what makes this team so great. Then you go to the bench. I'll admit the bench has not been as good as I thought it could be this season. And I will say that there's still the potential to be good.
Sure.
I think Zaire Williams is kind of slow progress is kind of a big reason for that. I am one of the people who kind of expected him to be, better at this point, just to be quite frankly, honest here. But I think, the injury and things have kind of slowed him down. And they put a lot of time into him in the offseason. But I'll say it like this, Joe. I don't think this team needs to make a trade because they're good enough right now. And they have a starting lineup that I don't think they're going to be willing to change. And Danny Green, in a way, I've said this a lot of times, Danny Green is your trade deadline acquisition. The thing that the Grizzlies can improve on, one of the biggest things is 3-point shooting. I think he's a guy who can help the half-court offense because with a guy like Danny Green, in the lineup at times, that'll increase the spacing. He takes 3-pointers, which I know Joe likes.
I like that he's willing to shoot the basketball, yes.
He's not just going to sit there, Joe. He's not just going to sit there. So with that being said, I don't think they have to make a move, Joe. What do you think?
I think that you're exactly right. Sorry, Locked On listeners.
Did we just agree?
We did, yeah.
You surprised me, Joe. I thought you wanted one.
I do want one. Well, there's a difference between what I want and what they need, right? Ooh, I want to trade because I think that they are a guy away. I've been made fun of in the past about this, about caring about the 8th and 9th man so much. I think they're a dude away from being an NBA Finals team. I really do. I think, and we'll talk about some names here later in the show that would definitely fit that. I think all 4 of them to varying degrees, especially the first 2 we'll talk about in the next segment, fit that bill. And I would give up a first-round pick. I would give up a young asset. I would do things to bring those guys in because I think Memphis is that close. However, as I have said repeatedly, and to pat myself on the back, I don't hear a ton of other people saying this, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Because it takes a little bit of craziness to say this because it doesn't make a ton of sense unless you followed this team closely. And I will say, to pat myself on, not many people, you excluded because you actually travel with the team, not many people over the last 10 years have consistently followed this team as much as me. All right. I think that's fair to say, unless you're on the ground actually doing the work like you. This front office is not going to make a move for the sake of making a move. They're just not going to. They are not going to change their timeline for anybody. And I think that we forget, or at least others forget, that this front office still very much is operating like a rebuilding front office. Obviously, the Grizzlies are not rebuilding. The players and the coaches are contending, and they deserve all the credit in the world for that. And as I've said before, the front office deserves credit for being really good at rebuilding. They're so good at rebuilding. They are a top 5 team in the NBA. But again, they have how many people on a max contract right now on their roster? Right now, this season.
Just one.
0. No, who's the one?
Oh, next season they'll have one.
Next season there's a max player.
Yeah,
right, but right now there is 0. He's still on his rookie contract. And that number is going to continue to change. Maybe Bane is a max player now. We can have those conversations on later episodes. The fact remains, they are not fully invested in contending for a championship this year, and no realistic trade that they're going to make is going to put them in that spot. So are there things that they can do to make themselves better? Yes. Are there things they can do to better position themselves in a Western Conference that's going to be a gauntlet? Like right now, if they were the 2 seed, there's various teams that are going to be the 7 seed that I'm like, ooh, that's going to be a tough matchup. The West is going to be tougher than it's ever been because of its parity. But they are not going to sacrifice what they see the long-term vision of this franchise for anything. I think they've proven that. I think they're going to continue that process. They've had success. Maybe this is the year that people get frustrated, but every year people chirp, myself included last season, people chirp wanting a trade. It doesn't happen. And then they made the second round of the NBA playoffs with a team that, again, was younger than 90% of the other teams in the NBA. Right. So I don't think they're going to make a trade. Damichael doesn't think they're going to make a trade, but let's just, for the sake of fun, say that they are going to make a trade. Who are some guys that they could potentially target in a deal that are a little bit more major? Maybe you've heard the names. Maybe they could crack the starting lineup in a very good starting lineup, like Damichael said. Or maybe they could be that valuable 8th man that I'm so obsessed with that people make fun of me for. We'll give you some names next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On, which is FanDuel. They're the #1 sports book in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports easy and fun. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. That's amazing. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. I think for the Super Bowl, it would be interesting to see the Chiefs to win, perhaps, with Patrick Mahomes getting a little bit healthy. The Eagles perhaps to cover, depending on who's favored. The over may look like a good bet with those two powerful offenses. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. I'm a big fan of the FanDuel app. It's extremely easy to use. Lots of fun. Highly recommended. Join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We'll be talking about potential championship pieces that could be acquired via trade for the Memphis Grizzlies next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your co-host, Joe Mullinax, joined by my wonderful co-host, the rose among the thorn, beauty to my beast, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis. I just like to make you smile there, buddy.
I appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you know what? I sure do. So, Damichael, you and I both agree that a trade is unlikely, not necessary. I think that we might vary on our logic a little bit, but we both get to the same ends. Mm-hmm. The means are a little bit different, but the ends are the same. We don't foresee a trade happening, but this is a trade episode and we need to give the people something to discuss. And a very popular name, not just among Grizzlies fans, but among Phoenix Suns fans, among all sorts of New York Knicks fans, is OG Anunoby. Okay, OG is a current member of the Toronto Raptors. And I do want to give a quick shout out to Chris Vernon of Grind City Media. He does, I think it's called the Mismatch podcast on the Ringer with Kevin O'Connor. And he made a valid point. You know, we talk about Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam and Gary Trent Jr. and OG Anunoby, all these great players that are going to command so much value in the trade market. Toronto stinks, right? Like are they going to fire Nick Nurse like today? Because if they have all these amazing players, why are they struggling in the basement of the Eastern Conference like they are? So I do think that's an interesting point to bring up. But OG Anunoby is a name that I mentioned on my Twitter account at Joe Mullinax on Monday, taking a look at possible trades and deals. And this is what I suggested. I would do this to Michael.
Okay.
OG comes to Memphis in exchange for Zaire Williams, Danny Green, 2 first-round picks, the 2023 and the 2025 from Memphis, both unprotected because in theory they both should be pretty lackluster picks, right? Number 20 and worse. And then I send Toronto their second rounder back in 2024. So that is what I would do in terms of an offer. I have heard from Toronto people that they would be interested in such a deal. I think that's realistic value, 2 first-round picks and a young player like Zaire Williams. Obviously, the expiring contract of Danny Green doesn't hurt either.
Right.
So that's what I would offer. I think that's close in terms of value. I like OG because he's one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA. And I like this particular trade because we talk about positionless basketball. I would start Morant, Bane, Brooks, Anunoby, Jackson Jr. Steven Adams would be my first guy off the bench. And I'm telling you, good luck scoring on my front court. Good luck. You're not doing it. Brooks, Anunoby, and Jackson Jr., those are 3 of the top 10 defensive players in the NBA potentially.
Man, that's frightening to think about. You know, that's a switchable, versatile lineup. And I think OG is a good target. And there's the other part of that too, Joe. He's a shooter. We mentioned
37% from 3.
Yeah, 37% over the course of his career. And he's been consistent, right? You go back to last season, he was at 36%. The year before that, he was close to 40%. Each of those seasons, he made 2.5 threes, 2.4 three-pointers per game. So he can shoot the basketball really well. Great size. You know, he's a super athlete. Guy I've been watching actually since Indiana. You know, he's always been a superb athlete. So I like, you know, the idea. My question is, how does the OG Anunoby trade work into, you know, the Grizzlies in terms of, you mentioned, you know, Zaire Williams and Danny Green. I think at the end of the day, that's a deal that I think that deal's a win for the Grizzlies if they pull that off. My question goes back to the starting lineup, and why would you bring Steven Adams off the bench if he is the sole reason? I mean, we're seeing how they are struggling right now to rebound the basketball without Steven Adams.
Sure.
And then, you know, just playing, you know, the other side of it here. Yeah. Let's say, because if it was me making that deal, I'd start him over Dillon Brooks. Like, let's cut to the chase here. Dillon Brooks is your offensive, you know, weakness, so to speak, in the starting lineup because he's not the most efficient player. He is now defensively, he's your strength. Like, you know, let's not get it twisted, but offensively, he's your weakness. Sure. And with that being said, OG would be an upgrade offensively, and he's a very good defender as well. And I say you throw him in as your 3. You keep Jaren at the 4, and you have Steven Adams as your 5, and you have an upgraded offensive lineup. But the question of that is, Dillon is the heart and soul of this team. He's your vet leader. He's your longest tenured Grizzlies player. I know this front office decently well, and one thing they won't mess up is the chemistry. Correct. So that is my take on that deal. But that's not the only player we got to talk about.
No, we're interested in another player from the Eastern Conference, and you know, OG Anunoby. Acquiring somebody like him could potentially disrupt the chemistry. I chose Adams to bench for the sole purpose. Like I think I'm okay with basketball analysis. Yeah, he's the one that would not rock the boat. He wouldn't rock the boat.
He wouldn't care.
Correct. He would come off the bench. He would still get 25 or 26 minutes. That would be my logic. But you're right. An OG Anunoby, you are risking that chemistry. Even if you keep Dillon, there's probably a version of the trade where Dillon is inserted, and then maybe you tag X on in a couple of firsts. And Toronto may still say yes, because that in theory could keep Toronto competitive because Dillon's a good basketball player, a good defender especially. So anyway, the other guy we like, Damichael and I, is Alex Caruso. I've talked about Caruso over at my Substack, Written in the Dark. I know other people like Matt Hardlicko, who I'm a big fan of his Patreon. He's talked about Caruso. This is a guy who would not rock the boat as much because he would be that beloved for me, 8th man. He has terrible usage, which makes me a little nervous given my John Conchar issues. But what he does extremely well is shoot the 3. He's a 40% three-point shooter. He can create off the dribble for himself. He's played some point guard in the past, going back to his days with the Lakers. He's kind of that combo guard at 6'5", and he's extremely good as a defensive player. He is a strong defender, can defend all the perimeter positions. He's a guy who is in the 94th percentile per cleaning the glass in terms of the defense of the Bulls being 7.2 points better when he's on the floor. You combine that with their offense being 3.7 points better, Damichael, in terms of efficiency differential, the term for net rating that Cleaning the Glass uses, plus 10.9, 94th percentile in the NBA in terms of effective winning basketball. I think I'd go Danny Green, a first and a second for Caruso. You slide him in as your eighth man and you say, let's roll. Does it impact chemistry? Gives you another creator on and off the dribble, a guy that can shoot the three effectively and defend well. He seems like probably a better bet in terms of fit than OG.
I think he's a solid fit. I think OG is a great basketball fit, but we have to think about, the other side of it as well.
Correct.
And that's why Caruso makes a lot of sense. I like what you said, pretty much everything there. And, he pretty much go into the John Conchar, role in that case. The volume still isn't amazing from the 3-point shooting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he'll probably let Joe sweat some of those remaining hairs out over there. But with that being said,
remaining hairs. Whoa! Why am I catching strays?
Joe, it was supposed to go over your head, Joe. It was supposed to
just like my lack of hair. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it was supposed to go right over your head.
Man.
But here's the thing, Joe. I think he fits in that people don't like the Grizzlies, and he's this defender that's taking charges at half court, and people just hate it. And defensively, we talked about the bench, right? The bench struggles primarily, I think, is on the defensive end. At times, Tyus Jones is not, the greatest defender out there. John Conchar, he's capable, but still there are some limitations there as well. There are limitations, physically with Zaire Williams being he's so young right now and filling into his body. Brandon Clark, great athlete, still an undersized big man. And Santi, all the physical traits are there, but still mentally grasping the game in certain ways that we've mentioned, on previous episodes. I think he's a guy that can kind of strengthen the defense there. Not going to bring you too much more on the offensive end, but he can definitely help out the defense. But guess what? We talked about two guys. We got even more, and those are bigger names. You might not even care about these next ones that much, but they could definitely make some impact. Ain't that right, Joe?
That's exactly right. These are two guys I know you like one in particular that we'll lead off with in the next part of the show, how they could help the Grizzlies offense in particular and the overall vibe of the team next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, closing up this episode with Damichael Cole, my wonderful co-host. I'm Joe Mullinax, and we talked about OG Anunoby, who in theory is a remarkable basketball fit, but chemistry-wise, maybe doesn't make as much sense. Alex Caruso, I think, is the combination of everything that the team needs with not disrupting the chemistry, but he might have some John Conchar to him in terms of not being willing to shoot the three. I'm not as concerned about that because I know Caruso in the past has been willing to shoot the three.
Yep.
He's a guy who has had not massive usage, but higher usage in the past. So I think that he would be better than Conchar in that way, but and he's a better defender than Conchar. That's not even a question.
Yeah.
But these are two guys that we're about to talk about that are a little less known than those two on the trade market, still from teams likely to sell at the deadline. The first one is a name that you brought up to Michael, so I'll let you kind of take the lead on your explanation for him. He's a guy that I've always liked. I think he went to Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. I kind of liked his game going all the way back to 2011. I remember watching him as a college player, which, again, I'm dating myself, Wizard of Oz and now Alec Burks being a Colorado Buffalo. But Burks is the name of the guy, and he's had some injury concerns in the past, multiple games missed for a long time there. But he turned things around with the Knicks, at least in terms of his scoring. He looks really good in Detroit this season in terms of his scoring. He could be a guy that could perhaps help that bench have a little more scoring punch.
This is one of those guys, right? I was just talking about the bench, and one reason the bench has been, not one of the best benches in the NBA, but still, a positive bench is because they don't have, a bunch of scores. It's a bunch of, Tyus Jones getting to his floater, Zaire Williams. We thought we would see a lot of pick and roll, right? I remember the first couple games we saw a couple pick and roll, but Joe, where's that going?
I don't know. That's a great question.
We're not seeing it anymore. We're seeing spot up shots, and we're seeing rookie year, plays for Zaire Williams. I saw someone post the advanced stat in reference to John Conchar, And it's like a very high percentage of his shots are like 3 feet or more wide open. Like
carefully cultivated, to shout out Keith Parrish of Fast Break Breakfast.
That's
curated offensive opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Santi and BC, I think, are great in their roles, but you need another wing guy who can get their own shot, and that's what Alec Burks can do. And it's not just right now. This is one of those guys I call Steady Eddie, right? So you go all the way back to his 3rd year in the NBA. He was averaging 14 points a game in Utah, and he was consistently around there. And then I think he went to Cleveland, for a little bit, didn't play long, 35 plus games or so, 11.6 points per game. You mentioned, the time he spent in Golden State and Philly, ended up averaging 15 points per game in between those 2 stops. The Knicks, 12.7 points a game, 11.7. Like, he's consistently going to get you buckets.
And if I'm reading this correctly, Damichael, sorry to interrupt you, he has not shot worse than 40% from 3 since 2020.
Oh, that'll be music to the ears of Grizzlies fans, right?
That's impressive. Yeah.
This is and we're talking no small sample size here. This guy's a career 38.6% 3-point shooter. This is a vet. This is a guy who has been in the league since 2011. So we talk about how this team needs shooting. That's a guy you can put in closing lineups in certain situations against certain opponents because he'll get hot. And again, the cost isn't too much here. Now, Joe, I will say one more thing before we keep going. The thing about I forgot to mention this a little bit earlier. The Grizzlies roster is jam-packed with guys right now that they feel have incredible value. Right. So basically, if you're saying, oh, yeah, let's just get Alec Burks and let's just throw 2 seconds in there, you can't do that. Someone's got to go because the roster's full. And you got both 2 ways are full. And they're all guys that this team pretty much values. If you would have asked who are in the, top 15 are the guys of least value right now, I would say Xavier Tillman would have been the primary answer. But you look on the score sheet of the last game, and Xavier Tillman had 8 offensive rebounds, and it was a big reason why that game turned around, Joe. So with that being said, they all just feel important right now. But that's neither here nor there. Alec Burks, what do you think? And then we have another guy.
We're going to talk about him tomorrow. I don't want to kill the lead for our episode for tomorrow. I would argue the guy that hasn't played a single minute for the organization would be a guy that isn't as important in this moment. Now, he's a veteran presence. He's going to make his debut on Wednesday. Lots of good things. I'm not trying to belittle Danny Green. I know what he could bring to the team if healthy. The point I'm trying to make is we haven't seen it, right? Alec Burks is out there shooting 46% from 3 this season. 46%. Could Danny Green shoot that well? He could, but it seems unlikely. And here's a guy that, again, Burks has played point guard before. He can create off the dribble. Danny Green in a couple of firsts, not a couple of firsts. Good Lord, Danny Green in a couple of. No, I'm correcting myself. No hot takes here. Danny Green in a couple of seconds for Alec Burks. I'm in on that. I think that makes a lot of sense. The last name we're going to talk about on this episode here, looking at trade targets, is from the division, Josh Richardson. He's a guy, veteran player. Obviously, folks familiar with the Tennessee Volunteers will remember Josh Richardson. He's on an expiring deal. Alec Burks is on a full team option going into next year. So these are 2 guys that are veteran, end of the rotation guys on a contending team. Cost friendly. Again, you could get Richardson for Danny Green, no problem. A couple of seconds will make it worth the Spurs' while. Danny Green obviously has San Antonio ties, so maybe it would make sense to let Danny go back there and hang out with Pop a little bit again. This is a guy who's shooting well this season. He's a decent rebounder for a wing. I think, again, if we're talking about 8th or 9th man of the rotation going into the playoffs, if Zaire's having a rough stretch, this is a guy that can eat those minutes and help contribute to winning basketball.
Yeah, and I think he's another under the radar one, right? We're talking about these under the radar guys, and you mentioned the ties to UT for one. Shout out to the Vols, VFL right here in the building. But with that being said, the thing that I like about this guy and Josh Richardson, both ends. Alec Burks, great offensive player, and we didn't talk much about the downside there. But it would be losing a little defense.
Yeah, he's not great in that area.
He's not a great defender. No one in the league is going to say Josh Richardson isn't a great defender. And I'm not sure what his advanced numbers say now, but I remember him from, when I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, time in Philly, and people, were very high on his potential as a defensive player. I remember at UT and Tennessee, people were talking about, him defensively. The Miami Heat, love, his defense, that Heat culture they talk about down there. He kind of fit, the realm up there, but he's kind of picked up, on his offensive game too, Joe. I really liked, if you look at the games against the Spurs, he was creating for himself, knocking down three-pointers. He was a problem. I mean, he was a problem in each of those games against the Spurs. The size is there, 6'5". This is a guy who can guard ones, he can guard twos, he can guard threes. You can put him in starting lineups. You can bring him off the bench. He can rebound. He gets you steals, long arms. 11 points a game this year for the Spurs. 11 points a game last season for the Spurs. And pretty much over the course of his entire career, his average double figures since his rookie year. His rookie year, he averaged 6 points a game. Every other year after that, he has averaged double figures. And you're talking about a double-digit scorer here. Career 36.5% three-point shooter overall. But I like the defense. I like the scoring production, and we're talking 20, 21, 22, 23 minutes a game. This is a guy you can add that can kind of create his own shot. He can kind of mess some things up on the defensive end. And he can be, another piece, on the wing. I think there's more offensive production to be had out of the backup wings. That's, if you want to be picky, I think there's more offensive production that you can get from that John Conchar and Zaire Williams combo. We've had games where we've seen those guys be scoreless together for 2-3 quarters. That cannot happen from your reserve wings. That wouldn't happen with Josh Richardson.
And I think what I like best about the idea of Burks or Richardson, I think they're both kind of one and the same. I would prefer Burks because I know he can create off the dribble a little bit more for himself. Not that Richardson can't. I just think Burks is better at it.
That's a veteran scorer.
Right. And I agree with you saying that he's not as good of a defender, although he is improved even in that stat or in that area, at least this season, a smaller sample size. Over the course of his career, not the best defender. That's the larger sample. What I like about both of them is that they are not indictments of Zaire. Zaire had the injury issue. He missed a lot of time. He's young. He's 21 years old. You can trade for Alec Burks for a couple of second rounders, essentially. And again, I don't mean to disrespect Danny Green. He just hasn't played for Memphis yet. So you can trade Danny Green for Burks with a couple of second rounders attached, and you can opt out of that team option if you don't want Burks around. Or you can trade for Josh Richardson, who's a free agent, just like Danny Green. And now you have a player who you've seen contribute, who you know can physically do it. Again, will probably only cost you a couple of seconds. And he can go in free agency if you want him to. And now Zaire's back in a position after another summer of working on his game to potentially be that guy that everybody wants to see contribute. So Caruso is a bit of a more long-term. He'd be around for a couple of years. That might disrupt the flow of Zaire a little bit. Again, they play different positions, kind of, or at least different roles in the offense, maybe is the better way to describe that.
Right.
But I think with Richardson and Burks, it is a short-term investment trying to get that bench better, especially offensively, but in the case of Richardson, both ways. And it allows for you to still have Zaire, develop him, and he can be that guy, give it another shot going into next fall and winter, which is one of the things I like best about either of those guys. So not the sexiest names. We're not trying to say they are. But again, if we're going to subscribe to the idea that they don't need to make a trade, which Damichael and I both agree on, OG Anunoby would be cool, but that disrupts things a lot. Alex Caruso is probably the best overall fit in terms of combining cost with, not rocking the boat, so to speak. But again, you're going to give up a first-round pick for Alex Caruso. Like, that's going to happen. If you want to keep that price tight, then you're looking at a Richardson, you're looking at a Burks. That's realistic for this team heading into the trade deadline next week. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen game-to-game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Next time we're together, Damichael, it's going to be game night in Memphis. Back to work, going into a back-to-back, the first game being against the Portland Trailblazers. Dame time will be in Memphis, it seems.
Yeah.
And he's I think the recently crowned Western Conference Player of the Week.
Yeah.
Back to form
coming in hot.
scorer.
He is coming in hot.
And then obviously to counter that, the Memphis Grizzlies are going to have the debut for Memphis of Danny Green, which probably adds credence to your I think you talked about Desmond Bane. Since it's a back-to-back, maybe he is more likely to play the second half of it. Danny Green's probably only going to play the first half of it, and maybe that's part of their logic. I'm not giving away insider information. I'm just using my brain a little bit. If Green debuts on Wednesday, it probably doesn't make sense for Bane to play, and then Green will almost certainly not play the back-to-back. Hopefully, fingers crossed, Bane will come back Thursday.
Yeah, things are looking up. I tell you what, it'll be good to have both of those guys, back in the rotation. But one thing I want to see is a Ja Morant with those two on the floor. The two best, one of the best three-point shooters of the past decade, one of the current best three-point shooters in the NBA, flanked by one of the best guards at getting to the rim and putting pressure on a defense at the rim. I really want to see what that's going to look like. Look, people, I don't have to, people know I think highly of Dylan Brooks, and I've kind of advocated for, him being a part of this team. You've advocated for it. You've threw money at him. I
would give him $80 billion. Absolutely.
Yeah. You've thrown the money at him. I haven't even done that. But with that being said, I think about situations like that Golden State game, Joe, when late in the game, Ja Morant and Dylan Brooks, are both near the 3-point line, and Golden State just runs the double team, at Ja, and he dumps it off to Dylan. He's wide open and he misses. You do that with Danny. I mean, he's gonna miss some, but he's a 40% guy. So the stats say you keep doing it, you're gonna get burned. And same thing with Desmond Bane. So I think that's the idea if you put both of those guys on the floor. And I mean, I think we'll talk more about it, and I'll get a chance to talk to Danny Green potentially, at practice, and I'll, have that on our next episode as well, and we'll get a better feel for how he thinks he feels. It's good for us to talk about it, but I want to hear Danny out of his mouth say if he feels as good as he did pre-injury or what else. But whatever he says, we're going to have it right here for you on Locked On Grizzlies.
His opinion is the one that matters most, isn't it? So we'll see after Damichael gets to go to practice and chat with those guys, give you an update heading into Grizzlies Trailblazers. And of course, on Thursday, Memphis is playing the Cleveland Cavaliers. That'll be a fun game. I think that's a national TV game as well. So a fun few episodes of Locked On Grizzlies coming up here. Stick with us. Make sure you're subscribing on any place that you can find a podcast. Rate, review, subscribe. You can like and comment and subscribe over on YouTube. Please continue to give us feedback. Interact with us in the comments. Let us know how you like the show, how things are going. Damichael and I are very appreciative of everybody that makes Locked On Grizzlies a part of their Grizzlies content experience. So until tomorrow, you wonderful listener or viewer, that's Damichael Cole. I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. This is Locked On Grizzlies. Until next time.